Hey, U.S. history students. Today, I want to talk a little bit about Reconstruction, give you guys a little bit of an intro to this time period that'll take place right after the Civil War. So, if you guys notice, I put the dates on there, but I put a question mark. So, 1860 question mark. When did Reconstruction actually begin? There's no really beginning part. Ultimately, the act of reconstructing a country is going to begin right after the Civil War, but plans are going to be put in motion well before that. But we do know that Reconstruction will end in 1877. So, end of the Civil War until 1877, this period in time in which the U.S. government attempted to rebuild the nation after the Civil War. Three things that they tried to do. The first, you have to readmit those states that seceded back into the Union. You see those on the map in red. You have to end slavery and protect the newly emancipated slaves. So make sure that the slaves that just became free are able to maintain their freedom. And then finally, rebuild the South. During the war, much of the fighting took place in the South. A lot of things were destroyed. Farmland, buildings, railroads, things like that were all destroyed in the South. So the third part is going to be to rebuild that part of the South. So we made mention of this Reconstruction plan for Lincoln. Ultimately, it's a lenient plan, malice towards none and charity for all. So ultimately, this plan is going to be one that hopefully will make a seamless readmittance of those southern states. So here's the challenge. The Constitution lays out how a state will become part of the Union, but it doesn't say anything about a state leaving a union and then leaving the Union and then wanting to come back. So there's no real law or precedent set in place. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to figure out. The other challenge is the fact that the president and Congress are going to completely disagree on things. During the time when this war was taking place, a lot of Republicans, and really kind of more further towards the Republican side, a lot of those people are going to become part of Congress. Lincoln is more moderate. He's towards the middle of the spectrum. So these people are even further, along the spectrum than he is. So even within the same party, you're going to see some fighting between Lincoln and those Republicans. Lincoln's plan, very simple, two parts. The Confederate state can become part of the Union if 10% of the people swore an oath of loyalty from that state and the state ratified the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment is the amendment that abolished slavery. It made slavery illegal in the United States. Those radical Republicans really didn't want Lincoln's plan. They felt it was too lenient. They really wanted to punish the South. So their plan, specific protections of the blacks that would be now freed, it would require 50% of state citizens to swear a loyalty oath, and it banned ex-Confederate leaders from serving in government. They didn't want people who were in charge of the Confederacy to become part of the government moving forward. So we have the wrinkle of Lincoln being assassinated right after the war ends, and no plan in place when the war ends. So this fight over what the plan is going to be moving forward isn't going to be figured out ultimately by the time the war ends. Lincoln is assassinated. His vice president takes over, Andrew Johnson, and he creates a plan known as presidential reconstruction. And you end up with this 2-year time period in which Johnson is trying to get his plan in place. Again, very lenient. Johnson sympathized somewhat with the South, and he wants the South to rejoin the United States. Let's bring the country back together as quick as we can and go from there. Ex-Confederate states could rejoin the USA once they ratified the 13th Amendment. You guys are going to be doing an assignment this week on the 13th Amendment. Ultimately, what it boils down to is it makes slavery illegal. You can see it down on the bottom part of the screen. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So 13th Amendment ultimately just makes slavery illegal. So this presidential Reconstruction plan by Johnson did not require Southern state governments to protect former slaves. So if there's no protections in place for those former slaves, there's going to be some problems. And what emerges are what are known as black codes. These black codes are laws that'll keep African Americans from gaining land, jobs, and ultimately keep them from being protected under the law. These black codes are going to be around for quite a while. They're going to become the basis for segregation in the South and discrimination towards the blacks, which will continue all the way up until the 1950s. So the radical Republicans in Congress, led by Thaddeus Stevens, opposed Johnson's Reconstruction Plan and pushed for laws to protect blacks. While all this is going on, they create what are known as freedmen's bureaus to try to help former slaves, provide emergency food, housing, medical supplies. A lot of these organizations were created under the idea of 40 acres and a mule. And ultimately, that never came to fruition, but it was promised during that time. So one of the most important legacy of the Freedmen's Bureaus was the creation of new schools. And you can see on this chart here, as time progresses, the percent of enrolled for white, you can see kind of maintaining around the same percentage. Whereas for blacks and other races, you see this uptick at this point, where now African Americans are going to start to be educated. We still see this gap that exists between the two, whites and blacks, but you're going to start to see it at this time. So former abolitionists, profiteers are going to move to the South. These people are going to be known as carpetbaggers, and it's going to add another kind of dimension to all of this going on in the South. Not only are they going to be creating public schools for children, but also black universities. For instance, one of the more famous ones is called Morehouse College. Some of you may have heard of that. And you can see all these black colleges, historically black colleges, that are created in the South during this time. Now, even with this Freedmen's Bureau, the radical Republicans feared that Johnson's lenient Reconstruction Plan would violate black civil rights. Johnson's plan only went so far, it didn't go as far as they had wanted. So Congress drafted the 14th Amendment, which made former slave citizens and guaranteed all citizens equal protection under the law. And this 14th Amendment is one that we'll talk about down the road, probably next week, because there's a lot kind of packed into that law. President Johnson thought that these new protections would anger Southerners and slow down Reconstruction. Johnson opposed the Freedmen's Bureaus and tried to convince states to not ratify the 14th Amendment. By 1867, moderate and radical Republicans realized that they needed to take control of Reconstruction from the president. So we see this tension being built between the president and Congress. It starts during this time, and it's going to keep building. So far, it's been building over the course of 2 years. So the radical Republicans are going to take control over Reconstruction, create a plan called Congressional Reconstruction, which will pick up in 1867 and go all the way until the end of Reconstruction. Again, this plan, a lot of their plans are going to be very strict, protecting the rights of former slaves, keep Confederate leaders from regaining power in the South. So Congress passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867. The South was divided into 5 military zones with U.S. troops to enforce Reconstruction. Ex-Confederate states were required to give black men the right to vote at the state level. And not only that, but to be readmitted, states had to ratify the 14th Amendment, which protected black citizenship. Johnson tries to obstruct this congressional reconstruction by firing military generals appointed by Congress to oversee southern military zones. So that's one of the ways that he's trying to keep the radical Republicans from continuing their plan. And he violated a new law called the Tenure of Office Act when he tried to fire a Secretary of War who supported Congress's plan. So there's a little bit of back and forth between the president and the Congress, and there's some questions about the legality of what Johnson was doing. So at this point, the radical Republicans are going to try to impeach Johnson. The House of Representatives voted 126 to 47 to charge Johnson with the crime. So to impeach means to bring up on charges. He is impeached, and then he's going to go to trial. The trial will be in front of the Senate. After 11 weeks, the Senate fell one vote short of removing the president from office. Johnson had successfully argued that he had not committed a high crime or misdemeanor. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys are thinking about the recent impeachment of President Trump, charged with the crime, and then it goes to the Senate. The Senate has the ability to remove the president from office. Impeach doesn't mean that you automatically are no longer president. There's a process in place. You're impeached by the House of Representatives, and then it has to go to the Senate, where they'll review the case, and then you can be removed from office. And that is something that obviously didn't happen with President Trump, and it doesn't happen with Johnson. In 1868, Civil War hero Ulysses Grant won the presidency as a Republican candidate, and he worked with Congress to enforce Reconstruction. Grant being a general, Grant being a little more hard-nosed, is willing to work with the radical Republicans. By 1870, all the ex-Confederate states were readmitted to the Union. You can see the years on each state on the map. During congressional Reconstruction, African Americans experienced unprecedented rights. The 15th Amendment gave black men the right to vote. And you'll even see politicians, your first black politicians elected to state and national offices. Literacy and education increased among blacks. We talked about some of the creation of schools and colleges. Black families were reunited, marriages were legally recognized, and black workers now could make their own money. So the story's not over with Reconstruction. We'll talk about some of the challenges along the way next week, and some of the difficulties that certainly black people are going to experience for a much longer amount of time. So for this week's assignments, obviously the first thing is this video, and you guys have watched that, so good job making it here. The second is an assignment, plans for Reconstruction. It's going to kind of dip a little bit into those two plans. Hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. You guys have a chart to fill out, and then a question, kind of a bigger question to follow that up. And then I'm going to have you guys do an assignment with the 13th Amendment, and not only put it in your own words, think about the meaning of it, but then you're also going to analyze it from a few different angles. So good luck this week. We do have a Zoom Wednesday at 12. If you have questions from either one of those assignments you want me to go over, I would be happy to on that day. And I hope to see some of you guys there. Good luck this week. Again, if you guys have any challenges along the way, you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to go over anything you guys need, either through email or in that Zoom. All right. Talk to you guys later.